May 19th, 1780. What began as a normal spring morning soon turned into something no one alive had ever seen. The sun rose like any other day, but it didn't stay. By late morning, the light dimmed. By noon it was gone. Complete, unnatural darkness covered the sky. Not clouds, not fog, not nightfall, but real, suffocating darkness. People couldn't see their hands. They lit candles to find their children. They stopped working, stopped walking. Even the birds stopped singing. In Boston, Massachusetts, shopkeepers closed early. In rural towns across New England, farmers dropped their tools and ran indoors. In Connecticut, lawmakers in session looked at each other in confusion. And in one diary, a man wrote, "Never in my life have I seen such darkness at noon." We thought the end had come. Church bells rang not for weddings or sermons, but in warning. People filled pews, weeping, praying, asking what they had done wrong. Mothers held their babies. Elderly men stared at the black sky in silence. There were no explanations, no warnings, just a creeping, devouring darkness that arrived uninvited. The panic spread as far as people could see. In parts of New Hampshire, it was said that the stars were visible at midday. In Vermont, horses refused to move. Travelers along dusty roads stopped, uncertain whether to continue or turn back. Some towns were so unprepared, they ran out of candles before the sun returned. And yet, the darkness wasn't everywhere. In some areas, just a few miles apart, the sun still shone. In others, it vanished completely. Why? How? No one could answer. There were no newspapers that could travel fast. No telegraphs. No cameras. Just stories, passed from voice to voice, growing darker with each retelling. Some blamed volcanoes. Some whispered about a war in the heavens. Others feared it was punishment for sin. In small villages, people reported seeing strange shadows moving during the darkness. Livestock acted strangely. Fires burned oddly, and the air smelled different. Thick, smoky. But where was the fire? Centuries later, scientists pieced together a theory. Massive wildfires, likely far in the north, burning through thick Canadian forests. The smoke carried east, mixed with fog and thick clouds, blanketing New England. But here's the problem. There are no surviving reports of any massive fires that week. No official records. No warning signs. And even stranger, the darkness didn't move like smoke. It didn't smell like fresh fire. And in some places, there were reports of silence, so deep it made people dizzy. A weight in the air. A stillness that didn't feel natural. People who lived through it would never forget it. Some became deeply religious after that day. Others went mad. A few simply left town. They never explained why. Years later, some of the same families who witnessed the event would swear that something else happened that day. Something they weren't allowed to talk about in public. Something that started when the sun disappeared and didn't stop when the light came back. But what was it? What else happened in the dark? In the days that followed the darkness, things slowly returned to normal, or so it seemed. The sun came back. Birds sang. Markets reopened. But beneath the surface, the towns of New England weren't the same. In some homes, people whispered of shadows that hadn't disappeared with the daylight, of whispers heard in empty rooms, of strange shapes moving just beyond the edge of lantern light. In the town of Dunwich Hollow, a woman named Mary Ballard refused to leave her home for 3 days after the dark day. When neighbors finally knocked, they found her huddled in a corner, eyes wide, her hands trembling. She kept repeating the same thing. I heard them walking. I heard them speaking, but I couldn't understand the language. She wasn't alone. In nearby Hadley, a schoolteacher named Tobias Crane dismissed his students early on the day of the darkness. But that evening, he was seen wandering along the tree line just outside town barefoot, still holding his lesson book. When someone asked if he was all right, he simply replied, "They told me to listen closer next time." He vanished the following week. Officially, no record of these events remains. Church logs mention sudden sickness. Town archives speak of unusual behavior due to the climate. But in private journals, the story is different. In one hidden note, now stored in a small historical society, a farmer wrote, "We thought the sun returned, but something else stayed behind." What did they mean? What stayed behind? There were also children who changed overnight. In Portsmouth, a boy who'd been mute since birth began speaking fluently, but only at night, and only in an unknown tongue. His mother was terrified. She brought in the local pastor. But when the boy was questioned, he only laughed and said, "The sun isn't real." Then he never spoke again. As more stories like these surfaced, communities became uneasy. People no longer trusted the quiet. Candles were left burning through the night. Some families never reopened the shutters in their homes. The darkness had left something behind, not in the sky, but in the hearts of the people. But why did some towns experience these echoes while others did not? And why do many of the darkest stories come from places that were already forgotten before the 1800s? Villages that no longer exist today. Places like Dunwich Hollow, Miller's Bend, and Blackridge, gone. Not just abandoned, but erased. In the archives of the New Hampshire Historical Society, there are 5 letters dated June 1780, written by a young man named Ezra Pike. Ezra was a traveler, a mapmaker, moving between towns right after the dark day. His job was to record roads, landmarks, and boundaries. But in his final letter to his sister, he writes, "The road to Blackridge bends now where it never bent before. I walked 5 miles and found myself exactly where I began. I hear voices in the trees, calling in a tone like wind, but it does not move the leaves. I believe something is watching me. I will leave by morning if it lets me." Ezra Pike was never seen again. Neither was the town of Blackridge. They say every mystery leaves behind a trace, a whisper, a record, a name carved in wood. But what if something strange happened, and not a single person spoke about it? What if one place remained untouched by the darkness, and no one dared explain why? As the 1780 darkness spread across New England, reports came from dozens of towns. People confused, frightened, candles burning in daylight. But there's one name that doesn't appear on any report, not in letters, not in sermons, not in newspaper scraps. The name is Winslow Falls. Located along what is now the border of New Hampshire and Maine, Winslow Falls was a small, isolated mill village, mostly known for timber, leather, and a quiet reputation. Travelers who passed through said it was polite, clean, and oddly silent. But after May 19th, 1780 nothing, not one word. The town's records show a normal week. The church ledger lists Sunday services without interruption. The weather log, which local clergy had kept for years, says simply, "clear and mild." Nothing more. While towns just miles away were swallowed in blackness, Winslow Falls reported sunlight. Not even partial shade. Sunlight. But here's what makes it stranger. In 1851, over 70 years later, a man named Elijah Cross attempted to write a history of the region. He sent letters to every known surviving town from that era, asking for journals, accounts, anything from the time of the dark day. Dozens responded, but when he inquired about Winslow Falls, he received a single envelope. Inside was no letter, no documents, only a single photograph, a drawing, rather, of the old church tower in Winslow Falls. And below the tower, in faint pencil, were the words, "We watched the sun disappear, but it did not take us." Elijah visited the area himself, or tried to. By then, Winslow Falls no longer existed. The road leading to it had been overtaken by woods. Trees too tall, too tightly packed, as if they'd been growing there undisturbed for centuries. No buildings, no ruins, no stones, only silence. He searched again months later, bringing 2 assistants and a surveyor. They followed old maps, cut through brush, even tried to use magnetic compass tools. But they kept returning to the same place, a clearing near a stream where the air felt unusually still, where birds refused to perch, where even insects made no sound. One assistant said it felt like they were being watched. The other refused to stay the night. Elijah never published his book, but in his private notes, discovered years later in a sealed crate, he wrote something that historians still cannot explain. There is a place in those woods where the wind will not blow, where the roots don't break the earth, and where time forgets to pass. I believe we did not find Winslow Falls because it never left. It is still there, just not in the way we understand. Some now believe that Winslow Falls never experienced the dark day because it was already in its own kind of darkness, or perhaps something else entirely. What does it mean for a place to avoid the effects of a phenomenon felt across hundreds of miles? And why did no one who lived there ever speak of it? Or did they speak and were never heard again? There are other towns, too, places with no records, no graves, towns whose names are etched only in the memory of travelers, and even those are fading. We are starting to uncover something older than the nation itself. A pattern, perhaps, or a presence. One that arrived in 1780 with the loss of sunlight and quietly placed its roots in the soil of New England. The more we look into this, the more we find that the darkness didn't just pass over the land, it passed through it. And maybe it stayed. In the basement of an abandoned house in Salem, Massachusetts, a leather-bound journal was found behind a collapsed wall. The house was set to be demolished in 1949, but during cleanup, one of the workers noticed something strange, a set of bricks that didn't match the rest. Behind them, carefully wrapped in cloth and tied with twine, was a journal. The name on the first page was Henry Wexley. The date, May 18, 1780. One day before the darkness. Henry was 10 years old when he began writing. But what's written inside doesn't read like a child's journal. It begins simply enough. Accounts of daily life, helping his father chop wood, feeding the chickens, listening to his mother sing hymns. Then the tone changes. The entry for May 17th reads, "Something is wrong with the trees. They move when the wind does not. I saw a man standing across the creek, but Papa says no one lives out there." The next page is covered in drawings. Dozens of tall, narrow figures, all standing in a line near what appears to be a river. None of them have faces. And in the center of the page is a single sentence, written in a child's hand but with surprising precision. "They came before the dark. They do not leave." Henry continued writing, sometimes 3 or 4 entries a day. He claimed that he could hear whispering beneath the floorboards, even when no one else did. He said the family's dog refused to go near the well. And then, on May 19th, he wrote only one line, "The sun is gone." What follows is not writing, but page after page of frantic sketches. Some are just black smudges, as if drawn in total panic, but others are clearer. One shows a circle of people standing in the forest, surrounding a large, leafless tree. Another shows the outline of a farmhouse, with tall shadows pressing against its windows from the outside. But it's the final drawing that has disturbed everyone who has studied this journal. It's a crude map, not of Salem, not of any known place, but of a stretch of land labeled only as Between. On the map are 4 towns, Hadley, Blackridge, Winslow Falls, and a 4th name that has been scratched out so violently, the paper beneath is torn. No one knows who tried to remove it. What makes this map unsettling isn't just the names, but what surrounds them. tiny symbols, resembling twisted trees and long, crooked figures. In the margins, Henry wrote a sentence again and again. It is not the dark we should fear. It is what walks within it. What's even more unsettling, in 1998, an amateur historian who reviewed the journal pointed out something shocking. A man in Vermont had drawn a nearly identical figure in 1971 after claiming he saw it during a camping trip. He was 8 years old. His drawing, filed in a completely unrelated report, matched Henry Wexley's sketch almost line for line. They had never met. They lived 200 years apart, and yet they saw the same thing. What does this mean? Is there something that moves in certain places when the sun goes away? Something that's not tied to time, but to shadow? To location? Could it be that what happened in 1780 wasn't the beginning of the story, but just one moment when the curtain slipped and people noticed? And what about that fourth town, scratched from the map? Was someone trying to erase it from memory, or trying to protect us from what it contains? There's something else. In the final page of the journal, tucked into a side flap, was a torn piece of parchment. Not in Henry's handwriting. An adult's hand. Maybe his father's. The note reads, "If this is found, do not follow the map. Do not dig. Do not call out. The dark can hear you." That house in Salem was demolished. Nothing remains of it now. But the journal is real. And people are starting to believe that Henry Wexley saw something and tried to warn us. There are roads that lead nowhere, and sometimes they were never meant to be found again. After the discovery of Henry Wexley's journal and the map drawn inside it, researchers tried to overlay it on a modern-day satellite image. What they found was strange. The roads he marked, narrow dirt paths between Blackridge and Winslow Falls, didn't match any current map, but when they compared it to a land survey from 1792, one particular trail stood out. A curved road, unlabeled, running through a dense stretch of forest. On modern maps, that road no longer exists, but the land is still there, just quiet, overgrown, and untouched. In 2021, a man named Daniel Keene, a former geography professor turned independent cartographer, became obsessed with the Henry Wexley map. He printed it, scanned it, re-illustrated it by hand. For months, he studied old regional documents, land deeds, logging records. Then he packed a bag and disappeared into the forest near the old Blackridge site. He brought a camera, a GPS tracker, and a journal. He came back 2 weeks later, alone, shaken, and with no working footage. His camera's memory card was wiped. The GPS was dead. But he left behind several journal entries. The first few are what you'd expect. Notes on terrain, compass readings, sketches of old stone foundations. But then the entries change. "On the 5th day," he wrote, "I've walked in a loop. The compass keeps drifting. There's a clearing that moves. The trees don't match the map. They're older. The next day, I saw a light last night. Not fire, not electric, just a glow behind the trees. It didn't flicker. It just watched. And then 1 day later, I think the missing town is still here. I just don't think it wants to be found." Daniel hasn't spoken publicly about his trip, not directly, but he sent a letter to the curator of the Salem Historical Archive, just a single sentence, handwritten in the same ink as Henry Wexley's original journal. "Tell them not to call it back." To this day, no one knows what it is, but others have followed the same path. Campers report getting lost near that same patch of forest. Cell phones stop working. One group in 2006 claimed they walked for hours, only to return to their starting point, without ever turning around. They said the forest felt looped, like it wanted to hold them in place. And scattered among local legends are whispers of a town that appears only at dusk, a place without names on signs, where the buildings are still standing, where no one speaks, and where if you try to take a photo, the image never shows anything at all. The erased town. Was it removed from maps for safety or for secrecy? Why did someone scratch it out on Henry's drawing so violently? Why did Daniel warn us not to call it back? And most importantly, is it connected to what happened in 1780? Because here's something no one can explain. In the exact area where that town should have stood, tree ring data collected by botanists shows something unusual. Trees that should be over 300 years old stop growing in 1780. For 10 years, there's no growth. Then, suddenly, the rings start again, as if time paused, but only in that spot. What could cause that? What kind of darkness? Not just covers the sky, but interrupts time. We began with one day, May 19th, 1780, a sudden darkness that swept across New England, unexplained and unforgettable. But what if it didn't start there? And worse, what if it didn't end there? While most history books treat the dark day as a single, isolated event, new evidence suggests something else entirely. A pattern, a thread, a line that cuts beneath the surface of the country, buried under towns, rivers, and silence. In 1978, a retired geologist named Harold Lyle was studying tree ring anomalies along the Appalachian region. He was looking for evidence of volcanic activity, but what he found was stranger. He noticed that several regions, stretching from northern Maine all the way down to Georgia, had matching interruptions in tree growth, years when the rings simply stopped or grew distorted. In every case, the year was either 1780 or within 2 years of it. But it wasn't just the trees. Buried in forgotten county records from Kentucky, he found a land survey dated April 1780. The map shows a farming community on a hill just outside a town called Hillridge. The hill had been cleared, fenced, and seeded. But the next year, a second survey shows the same land covered in thick, ancient forest. No mention of the farmers, no note of abandonment, just silence and regrowth that shouldn't have been possible. When Harold tried to locate the site, he said the land felt heavier than it should. His compass spun slowly in place. He left the area and never returned. In his last recorded interview, he said, "There are wounds in the land that never scar over, places where something passed through, and the earth never forgot." This phenomenon isn't limited to forests. In 1992, a group of researchers studying magnetic anomalies along the eastern U.S. discovered a faint but consistent distortion in readings stretching diagonally from Nova Scotia down to central Alabama. A crooked, jagged path invisible to the eye, but detectable by instruments. Along that line, Blackridge, Winslow Falls, the unnamed town on Henry Wexley's map, and 7 other sites where people have reported similar stories. Sudden silence, lost time, moving shadows, disappearing roads, and in one chilling case, a group of children who vanished during a school picnic in 1921, only to be found miles away, confused, unharmed, and completely unaware that 2 days had passed. They all claim they had been playing in the lightless place. So, what is this line? Some call it a fault, others think it's electromagnetic. But a few, the ones who whisper, not publish, believe it's something older, something laid down before the founding of America, before maps, before memory. In 1803, an anonymous pamphlet appeared briefly in Boston before being confiscated. Only one copy remains, hidden in a private archive. The title was simple, The Black Ribbon, a warning to the living. It claimed that the earth was stitched with invisible seams, thin, ragged corridors where the laws of time, sound, and nature were thin. Places where things could come through, places that sometimes reached out. It said that every 100 years or so, these seams open, just for a moment, just long enough to pull something in, or let something out. and it named 1780 as the last opening. If that's true, then the next opening would be due sometime between 1880 and now. In the final line of the pamphlet, it says, "The sun is not the keeper of day. It is the lock, and sometimes the lock is picked." What does all this mean? Could the 1780 dark day have been one of many? A breach along a fracture line beneath our feet? Could the missing towns, the wandering compasses, and the erased names all point to a secret history of these lands, one that continues to repeat? In 1975, while renovating an abandoned farmhouse in northern Alabama, a man named Joseph Harwell discovered a small iron box buried beneath a cracked floorboard. It was sealed with wire and wrapped in oilcloth. Inside were three things: a rusted compass, a child's cloth doll, and a bundle of pages wrapped in faded ribbon. Pages from a journal, written in 1881. The pages were unsigned. No name, no title, only a date at the top of the first page. August 14th, 1881. That year, there was no official record of anything unusual happening in the region. No weather events, no missing person cases, no darkness reported. But these pages tell a different story. The handwriting belongs to someone young, likely a teenager, and what they describe is all too familiar. It was morning when the light began to dim. I thought clouds were coming, but the birds stopped singing. The cows lay down in the fields. My mother struck a match for the lantern and stared at the window like something was coming through. By noon, the house was completely dark. I couldn't even see the fire in the stove. My father tried to ride into town, but the horse refused to move past the gate. He walked instead. We never saw him again. My younger sister, Emily, kept saying someone was knocking at the back door. But when we opened it, no one was there. Just the wind. Except the wind wasn't blowing. The entries continue over 3 days. They describe strange sounds. Tapping under the floorboards, scratching in the walls, voices calling out from the fields in familiar tones. At one point, the writer claims they saw their father standing in the barn, but his feet weren't touching the ground. On the third night, the writer says, the darkness lifted, but not all at once. It peeled back in pieces, like torn cloth. I saw the stars before I saw the trees. I saw the moon before I saw my own hands. Emily is gone. I think she followed the voice that sounded like mine. I can still hear it calling at night. It knows my name now. The journal ends there. Joseph Harwell kept the journal a secret for years, fearing ridicule, unsure what he had. But in 2004, he sent scans of the pages to a university folklore department in Tennessee. A professor there, Dr. Eliza Morn, compared the entries to accounts from the 1780 dark day. She found 12 identical details, identical phrases, even identical mistakes in spelling, as if the same voice had written both stories 100 years apart. But here's where it gets stranger. That farmhouse, according to land records, was built directly atop an old trail, the same crooked trail marked on Henry Wexley's 1780 map, the trail that passed through Blackridge, through Winslow Falls, and toward the unnamed town that's been missing for centuries. The same pattern, the same silence, the same sunless hours. Was it another breach? Another opening? But why wasn't it reported? Why wasn't it recorded in history? Perhaps because it only touched certain places. Perhaps because the people it touched never returned. Or worse, returned, but not the same. If this happened again in 1881, how many other times has it happened without being written down? How many journals are buried in forgotten boxes, behind walls, under floorboards, quietly warning those who will listen? July 3, 1980. Green Hollow Firewatch Tower, Vermont. An isolated structure, 70 feet above the canopy. Staffed by a single ranger. His name was Wesley Carter. 32 years old, a war veteran, known for being meticulous, quiet, and skeptical. Every evening at 6 p.m., Wesley recorded a routine log using an old reel-to-reel tape deck provided by the Forestry Service. These logs were meant to report cloud cover, lightning, and fire risk. But the tape from July 3rd, labeled simply log number 182, was never submitted. It was found 6 years later, in 1986, sealed in a metal ammo box behind the furnace in Wesley's empty cabin. He was never seen again. What you're about to hear is a partial transcript of that tape. The original recording is now stored under restricted access. What remains is unsettling. Tape clicks. Background: crickets, faint wind. Wesley calm. Green Hollow Tower, log 182. Clear skies. Sunset in 45 minutes. Visibility excellent. No fire activity. Pause. Static crackle. Wesley, slightly confused. Correction. There's a heavy cloud front approaching from the west. Fast. Real fast. That wasn't there 10 minutes ago. Pause. Shuffling. Chair creaks. Wesley tense. Birdsong just stopped. Not faded. Stopped. Like someone hit a switch. Silence for 10 seconds on tape. Then, tapping on the glass. Wesley whispers, "Something's outside. Up here." Another pause. Then, Wesley speaks again, strained. "It's not a person. It's not an animal. It doesn't move right. Like it's waiting for me to look away." Soft mechanical whirring. As if he turns the tape deck volume up. The sun's still supposed to be up, but it's dark. Not dusk, dark. Pitch black. And it smells like burnt wood or old ash. Creaking. Something distant. Almost like a voice. Wesley panicked. "It's calling my name. It knows my name. It said it in my voice. I'm locking the hatch. I'm not going down. I saw it climb the steps once already and then disappear." Knocking sound, not on the door, but beneath the floorboards. "It's inside the tower. I don't know how it got in. I don't think this place is in the forest anymore." The tape ends abruptly. No scream. No goodbye. Just silence. Then the click of the tape running out. Wesley Carter was never found. No remains. No signs of a struggle. His tower showed no damage. The hatch was bolted from the inside. The Forestry Service listed him as a missing person, presumed lost during night departure. But the weather report from that night says something strange. Unusual low-pressure front passed over central Vermont. Temperature drop of 17 degrees in under 4 minutes. Total avian silence recorded from 6:07 p.m. to 9:20 p.m. In the nearby town of Glassbrook, several residents reported electrical interference. One woman said her dog refused to go outside, stood by the door whining at the sky. Only one person, a retired schoolteacher named Martha Fields, said she saw the sky vanish. It didn't turn black. It didn't get stormy. It just wasn't there anymore. That was 1980, exactly 200 years after the 1780 Dark Day. And exactly 100 years after the Alabama Journal. 3 events, 3 centuries, 1 pattern. But what's more disturbing is what happened after that tape was recovered in 1986. A researcher named Daniel Horst, who digitized the recording, began experiencing vivid dreams. Dreams of tall towers, long staircases, clocks ticking backward. His final note, before his sudden disappearance in 1988, reads, "The voice on the tape isn't just speaking. It's listening, and it's getting closer." Daniel Horst wasn't a paranormal investigator. He was a linguist, a skeptic, a man of logic. He didn't believe in curses and hauntings, or in the supernatural. But in 1986, when he digitized the audio from Wesley Carter's Firewatch Tower tape, something changed. At first, he dismissed the knocking, the whispers, the fading light. He believed it was a hoax, an elaborate prank, or a breakdown in isolation. But then the dreams began. Each night, Daniel described climbing a wooden tower that had no roof. Each step felt slower, heavier, and from the bottom, something was always knocking, softly, persistently, as if following him upward. On the third night, he saw a mark, burned into one of the beams, faint, almost like a scar on the wood. He drew it in his journal. At first glance, it looked like a simple spiral, an abstract shape. But when he cross-referenced it with ancient symbology, something unsettling emerged. The spiral matched a star chart symbol used by 17th century navigators, a mark not found in standard maritime maps, but hidden in secret logs of failed expeditions across the Atlantic. One of those journals, written in 1692 by a Portuguese cartographer named Luis Mendoza, contains this line: "We reached the fog at latitude 44. The sun dimmed at noon, and from the sky came the spiral. After that, we forgot who we were." Daniel searched historical records, trying to trace the symbol. He found versions of it etched into the stonework of a crumbling church in Salem, built in 1683, a beam recovered from a burned settlement in Blackridge, dated 1778, and most disturbingly, a wood post at the base of Green Hollow Firewatch Tower, carved long before it was constructed. It was always there, waiting. He reached out to two other researchers, a historian named Carmen Eames and an astrophysicist, Dr. Louis Elman, to verify what he was seeing. Together, they noticed something strange. When the symbol was overlaid on the 1780 blackout zone map, it aligned with the pattern of reported sightings, not randomly, but perfectly. A spiral, moving inward, every century, the same motion, the same path, pulling closer to something at the center. Dr. Elman calculated the geographic eye of this spiral, a spot that hadn't been named on any modern map, a heavily forested region between New York and Massachusetts, inaccessible by road, marked only once, centuries ago, on a Dutch settler's map as Het Stilveld, de Schielandveld. No town, no structures, no trails, just one note scribbled in the margin of the ancient map, where even the birds fall silent. Daniel Horst never made it to the silent field. He vanished in 1988, days after purchasing a train ticket to Albany. But his journal was found in his apartment, left open on his desk. The final entry reads, "It isn't just the absence of sunlight. It's the presence of something older than light, something that's been walking through the dark for centuries, waiting for the spiral to close." And it's closing. September 14th, 1994. After 5 years of silence, Carmen Eames and Dr. Louis Elman followed the coordinates calculated by Daniel Horst. No roads led there, no trails, just dense forest and a growing sense of wrongness. They carried audio gear, a compass, a backup GPS, and a copy of Daniel's spiral map. The moment they crossed into the zone marked Silent Field, the GPS froze. The compass spun, and for the first time in her life, Carmen realized how loud silence could be. No birds, no insects, no wind, just the sound of their own footsteps on dry leaves. Dr. Elman, a man of reason, began to speak less. Carmen wrote in her field notes, "He's looking over his shoulder too much, like he's waiting for something to catch up." 3 hours into the hike, they reached a clearing, roughly circular, maybe 40 feet across. The trees around it were twisted, almost like they'd grown away from something. At the center stood a single tree, thick, pale, and dead. No bark, no branches, just the trunk. It had one mark, carved deep into its flesh. Not a symbol, not the spiral. A name. Wesley Carter, the Firewatch Ranger, the man who vanished in 1980. Beneath his name was a date. But it wasn't 1980. It was 1780. Carmen took a photo of the carving. The instant the shutter clicked, the wind came back, hard, and something else with it. She later described it as a vibration under my skin, like a generator turning on deep underground. Dr. Ellman stepped forward. That's when he found the second mark, not carved, but burned into the base of the tree. It was the spiral, but now it had changed. In the center, where once was emptiness, there was an eye, drawn in black ash, open, staring upward. They left immediately, but the forest didn't seem to want them to go. The trees had shifted, the clearing was gone, and Carmen's watch began counting backward. They hiked for 11 hours before stumbling onto a road they didn't recognize. When they reached a nearby gas station, the clerk asked if they were okay. They'd been reported missing for 3 days. Back home, Carmen developed the film, but the photo of the tree, the one with Wesley Carter's name, came out completely black. Just black. Dr. Ellman never spoke of the trip again. 6 months later, he retired. Quietly, moved to Norway. No forwarding address. But Carmen kept digging, and what she found next might be the oldest known reference to the darkness. Older than 1780. Older than any European record. She found it in a museum archive, buried in the notes of a 17th century French missionary named Father Lucien Barrat, who lived with the indigenous Abenaki people. In a translated journal from 1642, he writes, "The elders speak of a skyless day, a time when light forgets the earth. They say the land remembers it every 100 winters or so, and that when the spiral eye opens again, it will not close." There was no mention of the sun returning, just a warning: you may hide from the dark, but do not listen to its voice. If it speaks your name, it already knows where you are. Thank you for watching. Like, share, and leave a comment for us. Check out our next video.